In October 1944, the United States was steadily advancing and directly threatening the territory of the Empire of the Rising Sun. In response, Japan launched a defensive plan codenamed Sogo, aiming to sink the U.S. fleet and prevent American forces from capturing the Philippines. The trump card of this operation was the super battleship Musashi, a colossal symbol of Imperial Japan's naval ambitions during World War II. Alongside the Yamato, it was one of the greatest battleships ever produced by the Japanese Navy. Musashi was the second ship of the Yamato-class heavy battleships, designed by the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1937. Superior to any warship of its era, Musashi and her sister ships were built to engage multiple enemy capital ships at once. This design philosophy served as compensation for Japan's relatively weak industrial production capacity, which could not match that of the United States. The ship's name was taken from a Japanese province. Like the Yamato, Musashi's construction was heavily concealed. Large tarps were hung, and the shipyard was arranged specifically to block outside observation. This deception was so effective that the U.S. consulate located directly across the bay, facing the ship's construction site, remained completely unaware of its existence during the entire process. Due to the ship's enormous size, the dry dock in Nagasaki and its manufacturing equipment had to be significantly upgraded to accommodate Musashi's hull. The steel giant of the Rising Sun was launched on November 1, 1940. Captain, later Vice Admiral, Masafumi Arima, was appointed as the ship's first commanding officer. Musashi and her sister ship Yamato remain the heaviest battleships ever built, with a full load displacement of roughly 73,000 tons, a length of about 263 meters, and a beam of 39 meters, true giants of the sea. The interior was so vast that sailors could easily get lost. Engineers were forced to post directional arrows along the corridors just to help the crew find their way. Musashi's three massive turrets house 9 460mm Type 94 main guns, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a warship. Each could fire a 1.5-ton shell out to nearly 40 kilometers. To withstand enemy fire, her belt armor reached up to 410mm in thickness. Deck armor measured 200 to 230mm, and the turrets themselves were protected by armor up to 650mm thick. Despite weighing as much as a small town, Musashi could reach speeds of 27 knots thanks to powerful steam turbines, producing 150,000 shaft horsepower. Commissioned in the summer of 1942, Musashi entered service just as the war was beginning to turn against Japan. In early 1943, it was refitted to serve as the flagship of the combined fleet, replacing its sister ship, Yamato. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and later Admiral Minechi Koga both used Musashi as their flagship, a role befitting a super battleship of its stature. Based at Truk Lagoon, Musashi sortied repeatedly with the fleet throughout 1943, attempting to intercept fast-moving U.S. task forces, but never once made direct contact. As the Pacific War shifted toward carrier and submarine-based warfare, opportunities for decisive surface engagements grew increasingly rare. The colossal battleship often sat idle at Truk for weeks at a time, without orders. In October 1943, intelligence reports suggested that U.S. carriers were preparing to strike Wake Island. Musashi immediately led a large task force in what seemed like its long-awaited chance to fight, only to turn back when the American fleet failed to appear. The ships returned to base without firing a single shot. By the end of 1943, Musashi still had never engaged an enemy surface vessel. Instead, it was increasingly used as a transport ship or a ceremonial flagship. By early 1944, as Japan's strategic situation deteriorated further, the massive battleship was even tasked with carrying troops and supplies to isolated island garrisons, a deeply bitter assignment. Musashi was first wounded not by enemy warships, but by an attack from below the surface. On March 29, 1944, while sailing near Palau, Musashi was ambushed by the American submarine USS Tunney. The submarine launched a spread of torpedoes, one of which struck near Musashi's bow. The explosion violently shook the entire ship. Though the thick armor belt was not penetrated, a massive hole was torn into the bow, causing severe flooding. That night, Musashi limped away from Palau and made the difficult journey back to Japan for repairs. During the refit, engineers not only rebuilt the bow, but also dramatically reinforced the ship's anti-aircraft defenses. As the Allied air threat intensified, dozens of additional 25mm anti-aircraft guns were installed. By mid-1944, Musashi carried over 100 anti-aircraft weapons, ready to throw up a dense wall of fire. The timing of this refit was critical because the next test would come from the sky. In June 1944, U.S. forces attacked the Mariana Islands. Musashi was assigned to the Second Fleet under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. In the ensuing Battle of the Philippine Sea, the naval air power Japan had once been so proud of was almost completely annihilated. Musashi sailed with the Japanese surface fleet, but the battle was decided entirely by carrier aircraft. American F-6F Hellcats, working in coordination with fleet anti-aircraft fire, crushed what remained of Japan's naval aviation. In that battle, Musashi did not fire a single round from its main guns. After this defeat, the Imperial Japanese Navy was left with only a handful of fully trained pilots, and the number of aircraft carriers still capable of operations could be counted on one hand. Including Musashi, the remaining battleships were now forced to fight in waters completely dominated by enemy air power. This harsh reality set the stage for Musashi's final mission. In October 1944, the situation across all fronts was becoming increasingly dire for Japan. They were continuously pushed back in the Pacific theater and faced the risk of the United States approaching their homeland if they lost the Philippines. Tokyo decided to launch the Shogo operation, mobilizing nearly all remaining naval forces. According to the plan, Japan would use a carrier task force as bait to lure the U.S. Navy's Third Fleet away from the San Bernardino Strait, while their main battle force would strike the western side of Leyte. With this objective, 5 battleships, including the Musashi, along with 10 heavy cruisers, departed from Brunei toward the Philippines on October 20, 1944. The Japanese fleet executed a divide-and-advance strategy, forming 3 attack axes departing from Borneo, Nagasaki, and Singapore. Meanwhile, 4 aircraft carriers acting as decoys left Japan under the escort of several training vessels, 2 older battleships, 4 cruisers, and 8 destroyers. The carriers carried only a small number of aircraft to minimize potential losses. On the morning of October 24, 1944, as Musashi was heading toward the Sibuyan Sea, a screening unit detected 3 PB-4Y reconnaissance aircraft. The yellow alert was sounded, signaling an incoming attack by U.S. naval aviation. At around 10 a.m., dozens of black specks appeared in the sky. They were aircraft from U.S. carriers, sweeping in from the east. The naval battle off the western Philippines had begun. Musashi then became the target of an attack by 259 aircraft launched from 4 U.S. aircraft carriers: USS Intrepid, USS Essex, USS Franklin, and USS Enterprise. Wave after wave of attacks surrounded the ship as bombs and torpedoes threw up towering columns of water around its hull. In the first wave, dive bombers dropped multiple bombs onto the deck, while torpedo planes struck below the waterline. Musashi's gunners responded fiercely, laying down a dense curtain of anti-aircraft fire. They even elevated the massive 460mm guns to fire fragmentation shells at incoming aircraft, using the main guns as improvised anti-aircraft weapons. But it was all in vain. American pilots focused their attacks on Musashi's weak point, the poorly protected armor near the bow, and inflicted severe damage during the first 3 attack waves. This reduced the ship's speed to only about 18 kilometers per hour. Japan's Pride took a total of 19 torpedo hits and 17 bombs, causing it to fall behind the rest of the task group. However, the super battleship Musashi was still able to maneuver using its 3 remaining operational propellers, despite fuel leaks, fires on board, and the bow gradually sinking. By around 3:30 p.m., the American air attacks finally ceased. The Japanese fleet had come to a complete halt on the surface of the sea, and Musashi, at this point, had suffered damage beyond imagination. The intensity of the assault far exceeded the tolerance of any battleship ever built. Amazingly, Musashi had still not sunk. This alone testified to the extraordinary quality of her design and construction. but her fate, by then, was beyond saving. To avoid Musashi sinking in the deep water, where survival for the entire crew would be nearly impossible, the captain ordered the ship to head toward Brios Island, hoping to beach her in shallow waters. The engineering crews struggled to restart the remaining engines. For a brief time, Musashi managed to make about 6 knots, but the damage was too severe and propulsion quickly failed. The giant warship finally came to a dead stop, motionless at sea. Water continued to pour in uncontrollably. The bow sank deeper with every passing minute. Captain Inoguchi, who had sworn to live and die with the ship, sent his final message to headquarters, then returned to his cabin and refused to abandon ship. At 7:15 p.m., the order to abandon ship was finally given. The destroyers Yukikaze, Kiyoshimo, and Isakaze moved in as close as possible to rescue survivors. The remaining officers organized the evacuation of wounded sailors onto life rafts as darkness fell. At 7:30 p.m., night fully descended, and Musashi entered her final moments. She listed sharply to port. The bow disappeared completely beneath the water. Sailors leapt from the decks into the oil-slicked sea. The sound of tearing metal thundered through the air. Musashi rolled over to port. The bow went under first. The stern rose briefly, propellers still spinning in the air. Then she too slowly vanished into the cold darkness of the deep. On the surface, all that remained was a massive mushroom-shaped cloud of steam, smoke, and debris. Musashi carried 2,399 crewmen. The destroyers rescued approximately 1,376 survivors. More than 1,000 men perished, including Captain Inoguchi, who chose to remain on the bridge and go down with his ship. Japan's largest battleship had finally met its destiny. Even though Japan was willing to sacrifice nearly its entire navy to prevent the United States from capturing the Philippines, the empire ultimately could not turn the tide of the war. It was forced to surrender to the US and the Allied powers on September 6, 1945. Like the Yamato, Musashi never had the chance to prove itself or make any significant contribution to the Japanese homeland during World War II, and was eventually sunk by US air power. The fate of Musashi exposes the greatest paradox in Japan's naval strategy. It was built to dominate surface warfare, yet throughout its entire service life, it never sank a single enemy capital ship. Meanwhile, American battleships, armed with only 16-inch guns, proved their effectiveness decisively. USS Washington sank Hiroshima in just 8 minutes, and USS Massachusetts disabled the French battleship Jean Bart in a single day. This contrast is both ironic and brutal, and it could not be more obvious. Musashi was meant to be Japan's symbol of invincibility, but in the end, it proved only one thing. In an era ruled by air power, the raw strength of massive guns means nothing without a clear tactical purpose. However, the ship remains a symbol of a generation of massive, magnificent battleships that humanity was once capable of building. Along with its sister ships, Musashi represents the pinnacle of Japanese engineering and continues to be remembered as one of the proudest samurai warriors in the hearts of the Japanese people.